Hi, my name is Hamza. I'm a partner at Mckinsey based in London. I lead our growth practice, and most of my interest in the metaverse comes in for the last few years as part of growth for companies. That's effectively what I do. That's what I focus on. We wrote this report quite a few months ago. I don't know if you had a chance to have a peek, but it's gotten quite a lot of attention. So what I'll do today is I'll share a few insights from it. I don't pretend to know all the answers. I think anyone who does, you should call them out on it. And I'll keep this fairly short, and I'd love this to be more of a discussion afterwards. So any questions you have for myself or anyone in the group, maybe we just open it up. This was the title of the report. I think these days I actually start these conversations more with saying, look, the title should be more around the metaverse is dead, long live the metaverse. But let's jump into it. So I won't spend too much time on this, especially since we have, this group seems to be fairly metaverse educated already. But just a couple of things to get out of the way. There aren't many metaverses. You still hear, get these headlines in mainstream media about we'll build your metaverse. That's not a thing. It's like saying there's many different internets. It's not just immersive VR and AR. It is on a spectrum, and we'll see effectively by our definition at least what's included in there. It's not just for gaming. That is of course the on-ramp. That has been and continues to be where most of the activity is, but that's not it. It's not just for a small niche group of gamers or users. Actually, even if you take gamers, there's 3 billion of them in the world. So even gamers alone, there's nothing niche or small about it. As an industry, gaming is larger than movies and music combined. So that alone is large, and it's not just that. It's much more than that. And it's not Web3. So there's an overlap. If you draw a Venn diagram, and there's a part in there that is Metaverse and Web3, but it's not just that. There's a large part of it that sits outside of Web3 right now, so I wouldn't conflate the two. How do we define it then? So we consciously take a broad, inclusive definition of it, which is as follows, right? So it's an evolution of the internet that we have today. And it's already gone through multiple sort of iterations. The one we're most focused on right now being the mobile internet. And we think this is sort of the next cycle of that evolution, right? It's from something that we observe to something that we are a lot more deeply immersed in. And you can use that word immersed in very many different ways, and there's a lot of debate around that as well. But that's the broad definition that we prefer to use in all of the client work we do on this topic as well. What that means is, if you take experiences on a spectrum, and if you go from fully immersive VR, which is the world that Meta would like us to be in, and I hope there's no one from Meta here, but also, and then compare that to just physical world where we are, this part here is the only part, so just the physical, purely physical experiences, no virtual overlay on top that we do not include in that definition. Everything else we include. My view is a lot of the activity is actually going to be much more on this side of the spectrum in the coming years. We were just talking about this festival. And that end of the spectrum is going to take time, right? And for us to then have conversations about the hype cycle up and down on that end of the spectrum every few weeks, every few months, it's almost unproductive because that's a long-term shift. And we just need to have the patience for a long-term shift. There continues to be debate on the definition. We think it will continue to happen as well. That's not going anywhere. We don't think that's a bad thing. We don't think that means there's confusion around the metaverse. We think it's as a concept and as a term, it has become increasingly loaded, but it continues to evolve. While there is debate on the term, there is increasing alignment on some certain common elements, and that's the 4 here. We're starting to see movement towards some of these, right? So you already have persistent immersive virtual worlds. You don't have metaverses. You don't have a metaverse either right now, but you have virtual worlds. They exist. They're at scale. We have Khalid from Roblox. Roblox has over 57 million daily active users. That's a sizable virtual world right there. Interoperability, very, very limited for very many different reasons. The conversation always focuses on the technical challenges to interoperability. There's a number of commercial challenges to this as well, which is a whole separate conversation. Concurrency. So I think we have someone from Improbable here in the crowd as well, but that's we're changing the limits on that. And then finally, users having agency. So the ability to take your ID, take your assets, take everything that you own in virtual worlds from one virtual world to the other, right? So that agency of being able to do things beyond just interacting with fully created worlds there's increasing alignment around that as an element. why we think it is big, I won't go through these numbers, but there's just a number of underlying drivers, right? So one of the things that always comes up is we've been here with Second Life in 2003. We went up, we went down, right? Why will this be any different this time around? Because it's a very different world. Because of both changes in tech, changes in consumer readiness, through to changes in how brands and consumers engage with each other as well, right? So I lead our marketing and sales practice. Most of my marketing discussions are around how it is not just one-way marketing anymore. You have to engage consumers. It has to be social commerce. It's not just e-commerce the way we thought about it even a few years ago. So that all of these shifts effectively lead to a very different world. But this is not to say that the metaverse is going to be here by 7 p.m. tonight or next week or the week after. But this is to say that a lot of the underlying drivers for it are very, very different compared to where we were in 2003. And I'd love to be challenged on that as well, actually, if someone has a challenge to this. And then finally, sharing a few thoughts from the report. So we ran research with roughly 4,000 respondents in different parts of the world. And here are some of the interesting things that came out of it. So roughly 60% of people say they're actually interested in the metaverse and in transitioning day-to-day activities into virtual environments. And that's some of the things that they actually want to do, right? So it's most of the things that that side of the slide wouldn't be surprising. But that's the main drivers of the metaverse. So that's things around connectivity, collaboration, exploration. So one of the things that came out was travel. So travel through time, travel through different worlds, travel to real world locations that you cannot go to physically that easily. That's one of the big themes that comes out as well. But the interesting number is this one, is 60%. That's the level of interest that consumers already have, right? So again, you get mainstream headlines around no one really wants this. What's that? Like, why do we need to go towards the metaverse? There's a lot of people that actually do, once we start to talk about what that really means, once we start to get beyond that word. It's fairly common, so with all of my biases as well, the fact that it's so consistent, genders, generations, I thought was a bit surprising, but that's how it is, right? Millennials slightly higher than Gen Z, and you could say it's a limited sample, and so there's an inherent sampling bias, and that's perfectly fine. I wouldn't debate that with you, but it's sizable, right? This is not just gamers in basements. That's not what we're talking about here. Which again goes back to the point around more momentum. The other thing we did, and that's also in the report, is we surveyed business executives, so roughly 400, 500 respondents from across sectors, across regions, different kinds of companies, large, medium, small, everyone's in there. And we asked them about what's their level of interest, what's the level of investment, so their digital investment that they're carving out and putting into metaverse-related investments. And we started asking them about what kinds of things they're doing. So you see some of the stats here. The most interesting one I would call out here is this 95%. I've been at McKinsey for 11 years. I've done research on a number of different topics in those 11 years. We never get this level of agreement from executives in a global cross-sector survey. It's never this number. Now, in some ways you could say it is a good thing because there's a lot of interest. In some ways, you could say it's maybe a less good thing because that's probably a lot of confusion and hype that's feeding that 95% as well. But regardless, right, whatever view you take, it's 95% of executives, so almost 100% of executives that are effectively interested, are shifting budget towards metaverse-related investments, and are figuring out what those investments will drive, what kinds of activities, what kinds of returns they can expect. Maybe it's a little higher than it should be, actually, but that's where that is. How that cuts across different sectors. Couple surprises in here. If you've been involved in metaverse-related activities as well, I would have thought this would be higher. I would have thought this utilities here would be lower. But I say that, but we're working with a utility company now that's launching metaverse-related initiatives, both on the enterprise side, on digital twins that we're supporting them on, but also consumer-related initiatives. So you could take what you want from this, but roughly 500 respondents, and that's sort of the picture that comes out. The y-axis here effectively is the share of digital investment, future digital investment they've already carved out. And that here is the kinds of initial pilots and initial initiatives they're actually launching, and who's launched them and how many effectively, right? So you see already like a cut across different sectors. I'll skip through this, but effectively we're working with clients across sectors, across geographies on this. This isn't just working with fashion companies or beauty companies. That's another big mainstream media headline. It's all kinds of clients. And we're serving them not just on strategy, which is effectively what the Mckinsey name often is associated with, but on building use cases. That's the conversation that we were having as well, Faisal. So building use cases and actually scaling them and thinking through the business implications of those use cases. And what we're doing as a result of that client work with a number of clients globally is we're starting to think through what would be the value creating use cases today, right? And so this, if I tie this back to the first thing I said, which is the metaverse is dead and long live the metaverse. We're not in the metaverse. We're not anywhere near the metaverse. The metaverse, if you take that definition of it, that interoperable, multiple virtual worlds, being able to connect to each other and users being able to travel across them, we're years from it, my view, right? And I'd love to hear other people's views. There's nothing wrong with that. If you acknowledge that you could be years from that term, from what that end state could be, but today, there is still value. You don't have to be in the end state metaverse to actually generate value for your business, for your consumers, for your stakeholders. There is value to capture, and that's based on use cases. So I almost just like try and have these conversations without using the term the metaverse at all, because these use cases are real and are today, right? And so that's a bit sort of the focus of the report as well. How do you drive value in something that is a long-term shift? And I end a lot of our discussions with something like this, right? So there is value to experimentation. But I think a lot of times we get this question around what can we do in the metaverse? You could do a lot. What should you do, I think, is the real question, right? So what is it that actually drives value? I don't know if it's the line in the background that drives a lot of value. It got a lot of PR boost though. But what is it that drives real business value for your organizations, for your companies? It will vary a lot by sector, right? So, but what drives value and how can the metaverse link into that? That, to me, is the real value creation question. And that's a lot of what our report focused on as well. So I'll stop here. Happy to take thoughts, questions. Would love for anyone to disagree with anything I've said as well. And we can open it up. Please.
Do you think it really matters whether people want it or not? Isn't this just a supply side issue? It's like the Henry Ford thing. If you ask people what they want, they say faster horses. Like if we build this, like people will just adopt it, right?
So it's the Henry Ford thing. It's also the Steve Jobs thing with the iPhone as well. And so there's a version of it that he said too. So this isn't the Mckinsey view. This isn't the Hamza view now. I think there is something to be said for that. I think for the 4,000 respondents we asked, I think if the value driving activities aren't clear, if there isn't real, clear, compelling content for consumers to have in mind when they're answering these questions, you're going to get very different responses. If you show consumers what is possible, if there is enough content. So again, back to the conversation we were having, right? Like the iPhone took off when the App Store took off, when there was enough volume of content on it. A lot of the negative publicity around virtual worlds that are sort of growing towards the metaverse is just that they don't have enough content. And as a result, they don't have enough users. And the users that they have are not repeat users. Some of the platforms don't report on numbers for their experiences. They report how many people at one time are in that experience. They will not report on numbers around how many of those people came back a second time, a third time, a fourth time, right? And so I think there is something to be said for it. It's a long way of saying I think if we have the right content, if we've experimented and found ways that keep people engaged, then they'll come back for it. Please.
How does the idea of getting this interoperability between different aspects of the metaverse, at what point is there some kind of legal frame or otherwise around things like safeguarding and things like that? Because I'm just really conscious the internet just failed massively on that for the first few years, and how much thought is being put into that now?
So I'm definitely not the expert in that. I will say though a lot of thought is going into it. So you're seeing various different versions of this, right? You're seeing the emergence of or the ambition to have standards emerge, standards being things that just everyone agrees on, this is how we'll build it. And that's the Metaverse Standards Forum, and there's a couple other larger organizations that are bringing people together. What you're also seeing is regulator interest in we just need to do this differently, right? So it's not just about building a more immersive internet, it's about building a more responsible internet. And I think the way the virtual worlds have scaled so far, not everyone has had that responsible element in mind equally, right? There's all these like unfortunate incidents of harassment and everything else that users have gone through. So I think there is a need for it. I think writing and drafting regulation now for something that is evolving so fast is going to be extremely tricky. So you almost just need to see how things are evolving and continue to adapt regulation for it, which is not something that in my mind regulation is well known for. But I think that's going to be the challenge with this. I'll show you actually one more thing on this. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but we asked in the same research with consumers, we asked them what were their main concerns with the development of the metaverse. And the big three that come out, you can remove the metaverse from this slide. You can talk about the internet in general. It'll be the same three things. There's nothing specific to the metaverse. Now, some of these things, of course, you can say, so when it comes to user safety, you can say, yes, it becomes a lot more in focus when there's a physical avatar, you're wearing a headset. Like safety just takes on a different meaning entirely, right? But these three things, you can take the metaverse out of the conversation. It'll be the same three things. And so there is need for it. I think it'll be tricky to start to regulate something that we're just scratching the surface. It's just evolving so fast.
How safe an environment is it for brands to experiment in? So if you do something and whether creatively, what have you, it crashes and burns. Could that have other examples of that having real life implications for a brand, or is it a bit of a safer space because there isn't as much adoption as other forms of kind of market communication?
Again, my view, right? I'm sure like lots of people will have different views on this. I think if as a brand, you are going to experiment and you are going to experiment at the pace where failure in some ways is inevitable, now's the time to do it, right? Now's the time where everyone's trying different things, where consumers are open to lots of brands trying different things. We have somewhere in here a stat around how many consumers have interacted with branded experiences in the metaverse. It's fairly high. I think it's like 60-70% off the top of my head. Now's the time to try these things. So is there a risk? Absolutely yes. Again, back to Roblox, right? Like Roblox doesn't have 57 million users daily in one specific experience, but specific experiences tend to get pretty large. So if you do something in a large experience, you have a large number of people that can see it not go according to plan. I think that's okay. I think that's all right. It just depends on how you manage it and how you come out of it and how you build something else. I'm not naming names, but there's big names that have launched things in virtual worlds, not the metaverse, virtual worlds that have not gone according to plan. The launch hasn't gone according to plan. The announcement event with the CXO standing up on stage and not having an audience hasn't gone according to plan. That's all right. I think it's okay, because you just need to have the appetite to roll with that and then launch something better.
Thank you.
So in order to, I don't know, move forward on a grand scale, I think mainstream media is pretty important. What do you think about mainstream media, friend or foe? Let's say FT.
This is tough, especially from someone from McKinsey. This is tough. I think it varies quite a lot. And I think the best way for everyone, for us as a group, and for everyone who's interested in this, to separate what is sort of clickbaity kind of articles versus real balanced thinking is to just read more of it. It's a bit strange to say that, right? But I think the more you read, the more you start to be able to sift people who are actually writing a balanced view and saying, look, I don't have the answers, here are my thoughts, versus everyone saying this is the end and it's dystopian or it's the future and we're all headed there and everything will be perfect. It's neither of those things, right? But it's hard for people who are not in industry, who are not working on these topics every day, to just read those headlines and be able to sift the one from the other. So to me, there's a responsibility with mainstream media. But I think the way for us to, as an individual, to separate it is just to keep reading more. So one of the reasons I come to these discussions is just to learn. Because I think that's how we're able to separate one from the other. Sorry, I know I didn't really like get into your, but
Purposefully asked a very hard question.
please.
Hi, my name is Badr. I work in education technology, and I was wondering when you put up the industries, I didn't see education anywhere. What's your view on?
It might have just been a miss on our side then.
Because I would assume this could play a vital role in.
Yeah, I'd say pretty high. I think so education depends a little bit on how you define education, right? Are you talking about like virtual experiences to go out to big audiences, something like Khan Academy, moving to a more virtual version of it? I'd say absolutely yes, right? But if you talk about different grades and school education and everything else, there I tend to hesitate a bit, right? Like headsets in classrooms, I think we just need to be a little careful with because it has physical health implications and everything else, right? So is the potential there for these experiences to be a lot more immersive? Imagine being able to walk around a skeleton, right? As a student, being able to walk around a skeleton and being able to see everything as opposed to seeing a diagram in a book? Absolutely yes. But how we deploy this technology in classrooms with kids and who's monitoring it, both the sort of the hardware part of it and also just the actual content part of it, I think that it warrants thinking through. Potential's pretty high, but I'd be careful before we actually take this into classrooms. Sorry, I know I didn't really.
No, I was just thinking about the 2.5.
I'm trying to actually keep a little bit of my
2.5D experience that you described without the headsets.
Yeah.
I think these experiences could bring classrooms to remote areas and things like that versus the
100%. I agree with you. But there's a reason we try to keep cell phones out of classrooms, right? And I don't think like the metaverse just changes that suddenly. So I think that's just the thing to balance that with a little bit. I might be over time, but if there's any other questions, I'm happy to just take them afterwards too. Please.
I found your distinction between Web3 and the metaverse very, very interesting, and I tend to agree. I was wondering what you think the role of Web3 will be in the movement towards the metaverse, and if you can imagine a metaverse without blockchain technology and this.
So the second part of your question, absolutely yes. I can definitely see a metaverse without the Web3 variant. The big difference to me is, and I'm not in either camp, right? But the big difference to me is, the big philosophical difference to me is that the metaverse, a lot of it is actually being driven by companies that have the ability to drive this at scale. And Web3 is much more of a grassroots movement, in my view. And so I think that has implications for how far one can go and the other can go. That's my view. Right? There's a reason that what you would then, if you want to then classify that, there's a reason that the Web 2 versions of existing virtual worlds are at a very, very different scale compared to the Web 3 versions, without getting into specific names, right? It's worlds apart. And I don't think that will go away. Back to the commercial challenges with interoperability as well. I think I might be done, but thank you very much.